GDP difference between here and US is about 16, 17 times. And it is very difficult for many parents to have their children here, and at least for the 10% or so who can afford to send their kids, it's happening. But that also leaves 90% of the people here somewhat frustrated because even they want to go, they can't go for various reasons, policy reasons, economic reasons, all of that. And we've all discovered. And, so it's a little act, actually. This is an actual act. I'm transforming you for all the good work you've done today and yesterday and the day before to what the outcome of your work is in 2048. So welcome to 2048.
Today, in 2048, the world calls us the Indian Ocean Miracle. Honorable President, distinguished guests, and friends. I'm honored and humbled to be here. This is the new Colombo. I could see the change as I was coming here on Marine Drive, past the beachfront homes of millionaires in Millionaires Row in Dehiwala and Wellawatte, past the Golden Mile Entertainment Strip in what used to be the Bambalapitiya and Kolupitiya railway stations. I see a theme park with rides that skim the ocean waves. I see cafes and bars, a carnival, a docked princess cruises line filled with holidaymakers, and the Rio ice cream shop still going strong. As we turn north, past the tan marble facade of the American Embassy, past temple trees, past the stately Gold Face Hotel, I could see the tip of the giant Ferris wheel, nicknamed Colombo Eye, in deference to its London cousin, hovering alongside the Beara Lake. The lake itself is now extended by canals connecting it to Port City and the Deawanna Lake in Battaramulla, surrounded by a tree-covered boardwalk with lily pads dotting its waters and a few dozen lantern-lit Oru canoes taking romantics out on rides like Venice gondolas. We passed the neo-Baroque style Old Parliament building, now a fine arts museum and an auction house and a boutique hotel. This is the new Colombo, where the sea breeze that carries the parrot calls and the occasional peacock cry mixes with the thousands of dreams of young people who come here from all over the region to make riches, to fall in love, and to make the best of themselves. Then, as we pass the twin towers of the World Trade Center that look modest compared to its neighbors, my granddaughter asks me, "Are you a knight?" She was busy hopelessly trying to count the skyscrapers that dot the sky, eclipsing the naked sky, all gleaming in the golden sunset. "A Sri Lankan knight," I said, as we arrived here to the charming President House. And suddenly, I was flooded with a spine-tingling sense of pride for my country. This is the new developed Sri Lanka, where the average annual income of each of the 28 million Sri Lankans is on par with that of Australia, Canada, and Japan, about 42,000 US in 2020 dollars. We have a similar quality of life and are living into our late 80s with a genuine vibrancy. Our economy is booming with new jobs and dynamic companies. We are in the $1 trillion club now. It gives me the goosebumps. I have been a witness to this transformation. I accept the Desha Abhimanya Medal with my heart truly full. So, how did this miracle happen? In the early 2020s, we were drowning in that perfect storm of the bloody Easter Sunday attacks, COVID pandemic, Aragalaya, riots, and the financial default. At first, the talk was about hospital beds, ventilators, and flattening the curve. And as the pandemic dragged on, the conditions worsened. Our sick dying, our children stunted with school closings and delays, our businesses choked by lockdown and piling debt, and our government in a crisis. My life intersected with this outcry when I was recruited from my cushy private sector job, as the late president called it, to a nonpartisan, long-term development team that could work uninterrupted and unhurried by the election cycles. My heart jumped at the seriousness of the task. We were taking on the futures of tens of millions of men, women, and unborn Sri Lankans. I agreed to join on one condition. To understand my one condition and to understand how far we have grown in development, you have to understand how far behind we were just 30 years ago. In 2020, the gap in average annual income between Sri Lanka and the USA was more than 15 times, $4,000 to $63,000. The debate wasn't how quickly we could reach first world incomes, but whether we could at all. For decades, well-meaning pundits enjoying first world incomes conditioned us to accept that perhaps we could get to a middle-income country at an average annual income of about $12,000 per person in the next century. They saw neither the fire that burned in us nor the shame we felt permanently discarded to the hopeless garbage dump of third world. But I had personal reasons for taking the job. As a young parent then, I couldn't bear knowing that I would absolutely have to push my kids to leave Sri Lanka for a developed country, for an education and a chance at a richer life. Like too many others, I knew the trauma of that separation when my father left Sri Lanka to make us a living. Selfishly, I wanted to see my kids more than once every couple of years. Spiritually, I couldn't stand that we prayed and preached with such devotion about how rare and precious human life was, offering flowers and lighting lamps daily, yet we did not fight to give our kids the fullest lives possible, or the fullest lives for ourselves, for that matter, in the few thousand days we had left on this beautiful blue earth. So my one condition, we make a go for full development and first world incomes by 2050. With so much at stake, we needed a strategy that guaranteed success. We started with a single measurable goal. By 2050, reach an average annual income of US $40,000 per person in 2020 dollars. This level of income would bring Sri Lankans to the starting line of the first world. That's a tenfold growth in less than 30 years. We've heard this before, cynics shouted. They were right to be skeptical of such a stretch goal, given the mediocre growth from our independence in 1948 to 2020. But we had an insight. Sri Lanka was rich in natural resources, rich enough to support incomes of several times our goal of $40,000 per person. It was just that the people of Sri Lanka were poorly developed. Specifically, they were poorly educated, dropped out early without marketable skills, trapped in a poorly paid job market and an overall poor economy with limited purchasing power. We saw firsthand that the same Sri Lankans who withered in mediocrity would bloom within a few years when transplanted overseas in fertile lands like America, Australia, Europe, and Japan. We studied lessons from around the world and narrowed our strategy to 3 must-dos. I saw these must-do goals as the 3 laws that could skyrocket Sri Lankans to riches. In the plainest terms, we needed to first educate all the people. Second, make plenty of cheap energy to power the economy while caring for the environment. And finally, be a leading example in the world. These simple laws delivered us to our economic salvation. But, you beautiful, curious people, you didn't come tonight to hear me generalize now, did you? You want me to name names. You want me to lift the veil. Strap in. I'll show you how we invented the new Sri Lanka. Let me briefly explain the 3 laws. First, we would develop the full potential of each Sri Lankan. To reach our goal of $40,000 by 2050, the average income had to more than double every decade. And to maintain a fairer society, we wanted the income growth to benefit the poor and the middle class too, not just the rich. This meant we needed a broader base, at least 10 million jobs that paid $40,000 per year or more by 2050. To create millions of jobs, we looked at jobs that already paid well, like surgeons and software developers, and how to create more of them. We looked at world trends to find up-and-coming jobs, compliance auditors and green energy specialists that we could bring to Sri Lanka. And we looked at increasing productivity of low-income jobs, like farmers and sewing operators, with training and tooling. We needed big ideas that could add at least 1% of GDP. Fortunately, the government ministries and private sector had many proposals. In fact, there were so many proposals, we developed the, is this project necessary and sufficient to get to the $40,000 goal as the benchmark to evaluate projects in a transparent manner. We scored these proposals on the impact towards the goal, costs, chance of success, and a few other variables. After many discussions with leaders, sponsors, and the public, we picked effective ideas and empowered the same ministries to execute them with guaranteed budgets. This structured process produced more thought-out proposals, nipping turf wars, and protecting the projects to completion even when political winds shifted. Let's take one of the first breakthrough programs as an example. In 2020, about 1,400 doctors a year graduated from our medical schools, including those who returned from overseas medical schools. Looking at historical trends, we had only 20% of the physicians, surgeons, OB-GYNs, radiologists, dentists, and therapists compared to the developed country benchmarks. And we knew, as our income and South Asian incomes grew, there would be a lot more demand for medical services. In the fight to realize full potential of Sri Lankans, the late education minister deserves credit for setting a bold goal to produce at least 6,000 doctors a year by 2030, bringing us closer to world standards. Nearly 1 million doctors, nurses, and medical technicians have passed through Sri Lanka's medical schools since then, healing people all around the world. Today, we're a hub for medical training, medical tourism, telemedicine, wellness, Ayurveda, and high-quality assisted living. Taking advantage of the medical talent and the trade agreements, many pharmaceutical companies have also set up centers here with access to fast-tracking medicines to the 2 billion people in the SAARC region. A word of caution, debt. All these projects were built with loans, accumulating debt that taxpayers, you, me, and our kids needed to repay. So we made sure the funding went to actually educating people that expanded the tax base rather than creating fancy buildings for show. From our past financial crises, we had learned that debt is a shrewd and merciless master. Gen X to millennials of the audience, my generation, may remember the debt crisis we were facing in the 2020s. After the default, we had to resolve that. After Sri Lanka's independence in 1948, my grandparents and parents' generations transformed what was a colonial feudal society to one of a free market economy with socio-economic mobility. They bootstrapped themselves to middle class using aripirimasma, or thrift, as their rallying cry. The Savings Act of 2025 was built on that self-reliance tradition. Modeled with the help of our Singaporean friends, this set of programs encouraged working adults to voluntarily save about 40% of their income over their entire working life, matched with generous contributions from employers and the state. The public relations campaign for the program democratized financial literacy and personal wealth planning. There were TV shows, celebrity advisors, books, magazines, and even seminars at banks on practical ways to save and invest in education, housing, healthcare, stock markets, and businesses, giving rise to today's the Sri Lankan dream. Millions of working class families signed up and started on the path of wealth creation, becoming shareholders and securing a stable middle class. When we finally shattered the colonial chains that machine-gunned, oppressed, and legislated us to believe that we were an inferior species, when we finally stopped aping our colonizers by continuing the same bigoted behaviors upon our vulnerable brothers and sisters, when we finally invested comparatively to other rich nations in developing our people and stopped belittling ourselves with the derogatory ape minisu, our people, or our people, that's when we realize there's plenty for all of us, that the proverbial pie could be grown, and we began to step out of the darkness of fear, greed, and lack, and into the light of friendship and riches. Sorry. I told myself I would not cry today, but these are tears of joy. When I was a kid on holidays, my sister and I would scrape our knees just to climb a 6-foot cement wall to wishfully admire the toys and clothes our neighbor, a businessman, had gotten for his kids. Later, I learned they were middle class, and I promised myself I would not die poor. Like many of you in the audience, I too prayed I would not die in a poor Sri Lanka. I apologize for the tears. Let me take you to the next law. This one is about protecting our way of life on Earth. We would expand Sri Lanka's energy and environmental resources. As you know, temperatures rose above that 1.5 degrees Celsius red line oceans, including our Indian Ocean, have risen and are still rising. Monstrous super monsoons, that our grandmothers used to warn us about are all too frequent, making many of the coastal areas too dangerous and too expensive to live and requiring many to relocate. But all is not lost. There is still a chance to win the war by removing harmful CO2 from the upper atmosphere over the next decades, bringing temperatures back to 2000 levels. Particularly, low-cost efforts such as 4 per 1,000 regenerative farming advocated by the late French agriculture minister Stéphane Le Foll have become widely accepted to draw down and lock CO2 away in plants and soils. Without local oil reserves, we look to other sources. Fortunately, the world was moving away from oil to electric-powered everything, including cars. For electricity, we settled on the ample wind and solar resources and small-scale hydropower where environmental impacts were minimal. The Mannar-Vilppattu-Puttalam Energy and Nature Corridor, with its solar and bird-friendly wind farms extending to the Gulf of Mannar, provide enough electricity for all of our homes today. Like the floating solar farm on the Negombo Lagoon, built with the help of our Japanese friends. Many solar farms were floated on calm waters in lagoons, lakes, and reservoirs to minimize land usage. The rooftop solar installation program introduced to all 24 districts was a huge success in empowering homeowners to generate a part of their electricity and making them guardians of the environment. Still, we needed a weather-independent, carbon-free base power source. At the time, Mr. Bill Gates's TerraPower, the new generation self-contained nuclear electricity generator using nuclear materials from older generation plants, was looking to prove its worth. With US technology, Japanese money, and India's operational know-how, 3 nuclear plants with 3,000 megawatts of capacity were commissioned, the first of their kind. This project brought international attention and much-needed investments to our energy transformation. Prime Minister Modi, President Biden, and Mr. Gates deserve our praise for fast-tracking this process. But as we were beginning to win land preservation, we were still losing on seas, especially with the increase in fishing, tourism, and ships that call on our ports. To correct that, in 2035, we added parts of Sri Lanka's oceans, creating 4 new marine reserves. The crown jewel of that effort is the Raja Samudra Marine National Park, a no-take marine protection area the size of Sri Lanka itself that bans fishing, tourism, or other commercial activities. Dr. DeVos and Dr. Salah deserve our praise for their relentless canvassing to make this happen. Still, a lot of work remains, not only in safeguarding marine diversity and understanding the impacts of climate change on them, but also in supporting the fishing and tourism communities negatively affected by these reserves. Now, 12 years into protecting them, the fish stocks are multiplying, presenting another generation the opportunity to witness the spine-tingling majesty of a 100-foot-long Sri Lankan blue whale, the biggest animal in the history of the earth, glide gracefully by. After reserving 60% of the land to trees, fish, birds, and elephants, we had to find a way to house all 28 million of us without creating slums. In 2020, 7 out of 10 Sri Lankans lived out of cities, in small towns and rural areas dotting the country. Even the main cities, such as Colombo, Kandy, and Galle, were too sparsely populated compared to other cities of the world. This made it too costly to provide high-quality public services such as buses, garbage collection, piped water and sewage, parks, police, firefighters, ambulances, and good schools without big government subsidies. So, we welcomed increases in density to around 5,500 residents per square kilometer through zoning and incentives for residents to move in. These new planned cities had the added benefit to relocate people from rural and climate-sensitive areas to create more continuous space for farming and nature reserves. As new neighborhoods were built, or older ones revamped, however, we moved away from the 1920s car-centered city design with multi-lane, hot surface streets and cold climate architecture that required a lot of air conditioning here in the tropics. Taking lessons from Singapore and Masdar Abu Dhabi, our city planners and architects adopted new shaded walking paths, city parks, and energy-efficient designs. With increased density and pedestrian-friendly design, not only the public services improved, but also the services economy. Cafes, movies, concerts, sports, salons, gyms, boardwalks, shopping, and restaurants boomed. In fact, the average Colombo resident made a record high $88,000 in 2020 dollars last year. After decades of losing our talented young to greener pastures, the brain drain started to reverse. With access to livable housing, entertainment, and a genuine optimism, things started to, what's the technical term here? Gel in the cities. Today, 7 out of 10 Sri Lankans live in cities, and it's a good life. And the third law was we would lead in regional and global affairs. Today, you can get a kade te as easily as a chai latte at any Starbucks anywhere in the world. Even egg hoppers and crab curry are as popular as pancakes and shepherd's pie. Modeled on the Irish pub company that popularized Irish culture around the world, Mr. Munidasa and his ambassadors led the tireless effort to set up nearly 900 mostly franchised Sri Lankan restaurants around the world. Fortunately, over the last 30 years, a fortmate of unity, decency, hard work, and common ambition had safeguarded us and made us rich. There were many projects equally deserving that I did not mention. Thousands of brilliant people worked incredibly long hours, doing true acts of heroism to bring these projects to life. Today, I probably sound confident, but much of the time, it was nerve-wracking. All these projects required experimenting and iterating, but the 3 laws kept us on track. Personally, this quest brought out the best in me, bringing far more life than I had thought possible. Looking at this audience, I am proud, relieved to see the pipeline of traveled, results-driven leaders. But trust me, your struggle to vigilantly advance economic and political freedoms will be more complex than what we have faced. Changing demographics and the climate crisis will test you. Your generation will have to decide how you want to live, work, play, govern, raise kids, give, pray, and die. The Indian Ocean miracle brought us here. Personally, I got lucky. My children have stayed in Sri Lanka and were able to pursue their dreams thanks to the rapid growth we saw over the last 25 years. I'm certain, delighted actually, for my sweet granddaughter and all of you, that even better days lie ahead as we celebrate the 100th anniversary of our independence. It is a great day for Sri Lanka. A toast then. I'm told this is Rockland's award-winning Badula Reserve Bubbly. Honorable President, distinguished guests, friends, cheers. Thank you.
What a beautiful performance of hope and a vision for the future. I'm sure maybe the Sri Lankans here and maybe the others as well. If you close your eyes, you can kind of imagine that type of future when we reach 100 years of independence. And the performance, thank you so much to the beautiful performer. She was so elegant in her speech. And thank you even more to Asanka, who's the beautiful performer. And all credit should also go to Asanka, who this speech is a brainchild of his own, and it even alluded to concrete policies changes that we can make to achieve his incredible vision and goal for 2048 in Sri Lanka. So thank you to Asanka as well for that